I'll wait until oh yeah, perfect. Okay. So let me start. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. Thanks for joining the Beginner's Guide to the United Nations Framework Classification for Resources. Before we start, I just wanted to give you some housekeeping rules. We're all familiar with the Teams rules, but if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. If you have an urgent question, feel free to use the raise hands function. You can also ask questions or put your comments into the chat. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session. Dario, could you go to slide 3, please? On slide 3, you would have seen an overview of all the speakers. But I will not introduce everyone one by one here now. I'd like to ask the speakers to introduce themselves briefly before they speak. And then just as a quick overview of the agenda, we're going to divide the meeting in 2 parts. The first being an overview of UNFC and the generic principles of it. And then in the second part, we will dive a bit deeper into the topic of the specific commodities and how to apply UNFC in this specific context. At the end, we will have a about 15-minute Q&A session if you're in time. We will try to answer all the questions there. If we don't have time for all the questions, we will make sure to answer them later in emails or in an overview. And with that, I don't know, Radi, if you could go to the first slide of Dario, I would hand over to Dario. I'm not sure if I'm the only one not seeing the slides. Do you all see the overview?
No.
Oh.
Okay. Dario, I'll hand over to you.
Right.
And,
thank you.
We'll solve it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Bianca. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Dario Liguti, and I lead the Sustainable Energy Division here at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Within the work that we do in the energy space, sustainable resource management is a very important part of our work. And in particular, I would like to congratulate the Resource Management Young Member Group for launching this initiative about UNFC, a beginner's guide, which I call it UNFC 101, given that as well our friends from the Young Members Group are fresh from, some of them are fresh from university, some of them are still at university. They know very well what's UNFC 101. But it's a great initiative of dissemination of an important tool. You know that resource management, and when we talk about mining or energy projects, is an intergenerational issue. It's not only our generation, but it's more importantly as well is the generation of the young member group and following generations. If you think that you can, mines can be operational for more than 100 years, and the consequences of the impact of those mining operations, for example, can last for, as we know, for many centuries. And therefore, having a cross-generational perspective and speak the same language and take into consideration concerns and views and expectations from people across different generations is a very important point when it comes to making sure that these activities are sustainable from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and here with the time throughout the time dimension. And with that, I thank you all for participating. I hope you enjoy this webinar. It is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to UNFC and all of the work that the group of experts on resource management have been doing and will continue doing. And it's very timely as these methodologies and the work that the group of experts have been doing for many, many years is taking really now a global dimension with the recent adoption by the European Union of the EU Raw Materials Act. UNFC is now part of the EU legislation. It is the same across other jurisdictions and other geographies across the world. And obviously, we want that to become more and more widespread and more adopted as a global language for everybody to keep these considerations in mind when looking at resource management and being able to talk the same language and exchange information and exchange, especially and exchange, solutions for the concerns that are raised. With that, Bianca, I would like to conclude. Welcome again. Enjoy the webinar, and thank you again for the young experts for having put together this opportunity to disseminate this very important work. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Dario. I would hand over to Harry, who's going to give us an overview of why sustainable resource management is important.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you, Resource Management Young Managers Group. And thank you for having me to give a few words on UNFC. Future leaders. Our planet is our future. We know that global warming, environmental issues, social concerns are not just economic issues that affect businesses and industries. The crisis is pushing almost 26 million people into poverty annually. Today, our planet is at crossroads, and the choices we make today will shape the world for generations. UNFC is our compass in this journey, guiding us towards sustainable resource management. It aligns with 2030 agenda, ensuring that we meet our needs without compromising future generations' ability to meet theirs. Imagine a language that everyone understands, a system that can bring order to chaos. That is UNFC for resource classification. Having a classification system brings clarity on a myriad issues that affects us. Managing climate change, managing our sustainable resource needs are not simple activities. We have to integrate a lot of information and data, and this is where simplified information is required if you want faster decision makings. UNFC helps us make informed decisions swiftly, ensuring that resources are managed effectively and efficiently. With UNFC, you are not just planning for today, we are securing tomorrow. UNFC is not just about oil or minerals. It is about all resources, from the water beneath our feet to the heat within the earth. Through successful case studies, we have seen how UNFC enhances policy and decision making, leading to better management and conservation of our natural wealth. As we transition to a low carbon economy, UNFC is more crucial than ever. It helps us evaluate the impact of resource use on our environment and communities, thus promoting a balance between economic growth and sustainability. So future leaders, You are the catalyst for change. UNFC empowers you with tools to lead the charge in sustainable resource management. It is not a framework, it is a movement. By embracing the principles of UNFC and UNRMS, you are not just shaping the future, your own future, you are shaping the world's future. Thank you very much for this patient hearing.
Thank you, Harry, for the very motivational words, and also thank you for supporting the youth in sustainable resource management. Karen, I will hand over to you. Karen is the chair of the expert group on resource management, and she'll be talking about the purpose and benefits of UNFC. I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am just waiting for my presentation to load here. So thank you so much for arranging this event and for inviting me to be part of introducing the UNFC and why it's so important. And I'm sure we're all really inspired by Harry's words now, and I want to echo them. You know, it's really, you know, the solution is in the future, and it is going to be the sort of up and coming generation who's going to deliver a lot of the change that we need to see actually achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and all the things that we are committed to do. And so how does UNFC sort of enter into this? And I'm just going to do a whirlwind introduction to UNFC, and then there's going to be lots of more sort of specific introductions. It is going to be a little bit touching on a gazillion different topics today, but hopefully giving a really good overview of how this can be a valuable tool for sustainable resource management in the future. So what is the purpose and what is the benefit of the UNFC? Well, basically it's like, why do we even need to classify things? Why is it we need to know what kind of CDs we have on the shelf, or books we have in our bookshelf, or spices in our kitchen drawers? And the same go actually for resources. And there are many different approaches. And this is, again, looking at our CD collection. How do we want to arrange it? How do we want to classify it? Many different options. And it's a little bit the same when it comes to resources, although there are sort of a few guiding principles that tend to be how we thought about this in the past, and perhaps some of this also how we think about in the future. And if we think about classifying resources, who needs it? Well, we all need it in essence. If we start sort of at 1-2 o'clock in this diagram, industry needs it. Industry needs to know how much they have when they are entering into the business of making resources available to whatever it is we're making them available to. This can be, you know, digging minerals out of the ground, or gravel, or it could be groundwater, or oil and gas. It could be pretty much any kind of resource that we're thinking about. The financial community, who wants to invest in actually finding the resources and getting them into society. The civil society, of course, at large, you know, how does it impact us, both in terms of what we want in our lives, but also the impact that it may have that we are taking something from the earth. When we look at the creators of energy and mineral studies, it's really kind of like, how do we gather data so that we can make sound decisions? And that gets us to 12 o'clock on this diagram. Governments need to know what resources they have available to them to make good and sound decisions for their community. And so the challenge of classification is a very simplified figure after Professor Tom Gradle at Yale University. And basically, it has to do a little bit with how certain are we and what is the viability of resources. And basically, you can say we typically, when we talk about resources, not universally, but typically talk about resources that we know that we have, and we know it's viable. We know that we're not going to lose money by getting these resources. We call those reserves, and they are they're in this diagram with a little red dot, and that's the sort of smallest entity that we know that we have. But there's much more than that, of course. There are resources that we actually do know are there. We just don't actually know, do we have the technologies? Is it really viable for us to extract them? There's somewhat more uncertain. And some of them are even more poorly described. That's perhaps a wider circle yet. And then we actually know there's probably stuff we haven't even found yet. there are resources that probably are hiding somewhere that we haven't even found yet. So the resource base is potentially huge, but what we actually know that we have and what we're making decisions on is much smaller than that. And so Enter UNFC is basically trying to classify resources in a slightly new way. And it's one of the beauties about the UN framework classification is that it actually applies to, or can apply, it's being designed to apply to many different types of resources, which is really unusual. So we're talking about things like minerals, we're talking about petroleum, we're talking about injection projects, that's CCS, it's geothermal heat, these kinds of things. We're also looking at renewable energies and also anthropogenic. So actually the waste streams that we've generated through the last few centuries are also actually entering in as a resource base that we can look at. And I don't know what happened to this figure. It's supposed to show the entire world. It doesn't on my slide, it might on yours, but what it actually is, it's a download from the USGS website from October of last year. And it's just showing all of the deposits of critical minerals, just to give an example of where we actually know that there are resources. So now we're out in that big circle of what we know is out there. And the thing is, of course, most of these projects are not going to be tenable. They're not going to be viable. But when you look at a map like this, as a government or as a global community or as a community, how do you choose? Which ones of these ones are you actually going to take forward? And that's where we need the UNFC. And Harry already introduced it. And you're going to hear this many, many more times. That basically the three things that we're combining into classifying the resources. The technical feasibility, can we get it? The economic feasibility, is it just going to cost us money, or is it actually going to create a surplus for us? But then also the socio-environmental. And that's really, really important, because we think about the economic impact, oftentimes we'll translate that to value, but actually the value of resource extraction is way beyond that. It's also the socio-environmental impact that we have. And that can be both a positive impact and a negative impact. And it's really important that we have ways of looking at resources where we are talking about value to the community, to the society, to the region that we are talking about. So those three axes are entering into the classification. And I'm not showing the technical diagram because I know you'll see it from lots of other speakers here today. But basically, using those three parameters allows us to make three main classifications: viable, potentially viable, and non-viable. And again, from a point of view of, does this actually create value? Again, we can combine many different resources into one global classification system, which is a huge advantage. And we are informed on the environmental, social, and government issues of both a local, a regional, and a national level, and in principle, even on an international level, rolling this out around the world. And I think I might have gone a minute or two over, but I am now finished. So thank you very much.
That's totally okay. Thank you, Karen, for providing insights on why UNFC is needed. And now after the why, let's dive into the how with Alistair, who's going to talk about the categories and classes of UNFC and provide an introduction there. So thank you, Alistair. I give the floor to you.
That's great. Thanks, Bianca. And hi, everybody. Let me just put this on full screen. Okay, so really pleased to be here and to say a little bit. In a sense, I'm kind of expanding a little bit on what Karen has just said. And I want to introduce you to the principles which define the UNFC categories and classes and what these are. So imagine a deposit of minerals. UNFC describes the viability of projects to produce those minerals and the confidence in the estimates of future quantities. So initially, you have a potential source of minerals, nothing's been drilled, and its status is on the right-hand side. There are only prospective projects. You don't even know for sure there's anything there. Next, we drill, and we're pleased to discover resources in maybe just part of the deposit that we drilled. And so now part of that deposit can move over to the right-hand side as a known source. And we plan projects to produce it. Some projects may become viable. So what do we mean by viable? Though, just to kind of reiterate what Karen said, these are projects that are environmentally, socially, and economically acceptable. They're technically feasible, and we can define how much will be produced, which are those three criteria you see on the right-hand side. The whole blue area represents the total products that would result from digging up the whole deposit. You can see that over time, various projects can be at different stages. And at some point in time, there's already perhaps been some production. You see that on the top left-hand side. Some projects are viable. In other words, we have confidence that they are going to produce, and we're able to describe the quantities that they will produce. We may have other projects kind of in the pipeline, which are less mature and are potentially viable, or even non-viable. In other words, ideas that we have for projects but just don't work at the moment, maybe environmentally or socially or economically or technically. There are hurdles that we don't know how to overcome. And then there will be some potential product for which there is no identified project. So currently, you know, if we could get everything out, we would produce the whole thing, but we can't even think of projects. We can't even conceive how to get everything out. That's perhaps easier to imagine if you were describing a wind resource, because this idea applies equally to other natural and secondary resources. So if you had an area in which you had wind blowing and there is potential for producing electricity from a wind farm, the total product would be all the electricity that you could generate if you could turn all the energy of the wind into electricity. But we know that that's not, at the moment, fully practical. You can't harness everything. And so you're likely to be left with that annoying remaining products not developed by identified projects. So as I say, the same ideas apply to any natural or secondary resource. And so this is the classification, these highlighted, these bolden names, the viable, potentially viable, non-viable, prospective projects, and so on. So we define the viability of a project, as I said, based on three criteria: the environmental, socioeconomic viability, the technical feasibility, and the degree of confidence in estimates. And in UNFC, projects are coded E1 to 3, F1 to 4, depending on the maturity of the project, and the estimated quantity of the product from that project is coded G1 to 4, depending on the confidence in the estimate. And the position along an axis is known as the category, with E1, F1, G1 being the highest category, or the feasible projects. For convenience, classes are defined as groups of categories. So useful combinations of categories. So you can see on the left-hand side the classes that we discussed earlier of viable, potentially viable, non-viable, etc., and the related categories E, F, and G that allow you to get into that class. And you can see there's that two-dimensional representation, or there's the three-dimensional representation on the right-hand side, which are positions in 3D space of those three axes. And you can see that there are other combinations possible other than those specific classes that we've named. One can go to a finer level of detail and define subcategories and subclasses. And the point of that is to give you a user more precise assessment of the project. And the UNFC specifications give definitions and details and explanations, and that's a key reference document which you can find if you look on the EGRM website. I want to finish by going back to the diagram which Karen showed and saying something a bit more about information for decisions. So UNFC gives information on project status and quantities to help decision makers. That is, to help a government understand its resource base and readiness to produce, and so plan its policies to encourage the right developments and so forth. A company to manage its portfolio of projects and decide what to work on. A capital allocator to decide which projects or companies to invest in. Now, the information about project status and how much will be produced and the confidence in that estimate of production is essential. But decision makers consider other factors as well. Things like how many local jobs will be created, what will the greenhouse gas emissions be, what will the costs and cash flows be, how much water will be used, what displacement of local community might occur. Now, the UNFC G-axis can be used not only to carry estimates of production, but other project metrics as well. And that's a new departure for resource classification and for EGRM. It was something that was agreed 2 years ago at the EGRM meeting. The strength of UNFC is that it's globally applicable and an acceptable system to provide clear and trusted information. And using it to carry relevant information for projects, which is clear and trusted by all stakeholders, will enable the coordination of different parties and the governments, the industry, the financial community, but of course the public as well, in making good decisions for sustainable development. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for giving a bit more technical insights also in how UNFC is applied. Next one is Julian. However, he is a bit late, so he will hopefully join later. I will give the floor to Slavko, who is going to talk about how this generic cube of UNFC can be applied to specific commodities. So I give the floor to Slavko. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess you can see the presentation, or not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let's start again.
Now we see the PowerPoint window, yes.
Perfect. Now it should work. Thank you. And you can see me as well in the room. So let me first introduce our interns working with us on these interesting matters, Kalista and Dario. I will, in my short presentation, try to tell you how to apply UNFC correctly. You already did see from Alistair what UNFC is about. and the three axes: degree of confidence, technical feasibility, and environmental, socioeconomic feasibility, viability. So UNFC is an international scheme for classification, management, and reporting of energy, raw materials, and the other ones. How do we apply it? Alistair also touched on the definitions and the principles of classification, but that would not be enough to actually put it on the ground and classify a resource. So what is being done in the past almost 30 years or 30 years are also specifications, which are application rules, the guidelines, and also lots of case studies. So showing you how the sequence of documents works. We have the UNFC, we have a generic rules or specifications telling it how it applies. Then we have a supplementary specifications, which would look at certain resource, such as minerals, such as oil, such as groundwater, and so on and so on. Further down, we have a bridging document, which would align with the other classifications. And on the next level, we have non-mandatory documents called guidance that would tell you how to further refine your classification works. So going quickly through the generic and supplementary specifications, as I said, the supplementary ones are for minerals, anthropogenic resources, which we will also call the secondary raw materials, petroleum, renewable energy, geothermal, in more specific solar, wind, injection project, bioenergy, and the draft specifications on nuclear project and groundwater. So for all these resources, we do have additional rules that needs to be followed. The set of documents, which is also important and would link UNFC, would make UNFC as a classification platform for all the resources, would be the bridging documents. Is the document that explains the relationship between UNFC and other classification systems. As you see on the right side, there are the bridging documents with a Crisco template for minerals, PRMS for petroleum, the Red Book for nuclear, and some national classifications are also bridged to UNFC. In the corner down, there are examples how this works, very simplified versions, but in practice, this is a bit more complex. The next part would be looking at the guidance document. There would be guidance on social environmental considerations, which Julian, if he will join us, will tell us more about. There is also a guidance document how to deal with the classification of uranium and thorium, competency guidelines, and so on. Very recently, the UNFC guidance for Europe was done, which is a document that would assist regional national authorities in establishing, maintaining project-based inventory for primary and secondary raw materials in Europe, using UNFC as a platform where all the national inventories could be put on the same equivalent. This guidance, of course, would work for the governments, authorities, as decision makers or users, but also for qualified experts that would actually classify. What is also important to mention is amount of the UNFC case studies, which would tell you how this been done in certain area for certain resource in a certain circumstances. I'm showing here just a minor part of minerals in Europe of these case studies that are done and that are followed. So some of the case studies would also be firmly reviewed by the EGRM and would be example to follow how to correctly use the UNFC. With this, I would thank you for your attention. Thank you, and get back to you, Blanca.
Thank you, Slavko, for contextualizing also documents around UNFC, as it's a complex topic that needs different approaches. Happily, Julian just arrived to the meeting, so he will be talking about environmental, social, and governance factors concerning UNFC, as that is one of the major added values of this classification system. So welcome, Julian. Thanks for making it, and I hand over the floor to you.
Yes, my apologies for being late, but happy Friday to everybody. I will not, I think, try to go into a great deal of detail because I have 2 or 3 minutes and I'm already causing you to run late. But I wanted to pick up on why, in one sense, is it, I think, that UNRMS has to be brought in when we talk about ESG, because I can't see how it could be otherwise. And secondly, I think, why is that connection so important? Also, of course, to UNFC. I think that the answer is quite simple. We've tended to lose track of the fact that in the ESG acronym, it's only the G that's different. The environmental, social, and economic, the triple bottom line, was invented in 1992 and presented to the California Business Review by John Elkington, following the Brundtland report, to which it responds. So that's point number one. Never forget that the whole of this goes back to our common future and what was set out with that. And Elkington's position, which was really visionary for industry, was to say industry needs to respond, needs to be actively engaged, and needs to report. Now, there's nothing different fundamentally in the ESG proposition. It's tightening the grip on what we want you to report about and why. Now, I think the connection to that is made most clearly and bluntly in the May 2021 policy brief, which recommends the joint use of UNFC and UNRMS. So I think that indivisibility was already accepted by the UN at that point. Was really no prompting. I don't know, Harry can contradict me, but I don't think there was much lobbying to make that done. It was so obvious the two have to work together. But in that process, what was really picked up on, and that, of course, is because it impacts the environmental and social, is negative externalities. Those costs imposed by current generations, including our own, very obviously, and avoided in some sense, because they're then passed on to generations as yet unborn who weren't asked about that. Now, what is very interesting is there's just been a report come out which is challenging the way in which governments seem to be tightening up on people who are climate activists, but not tightening up on other forms of carbon, of weakening of carbon policies. Why not? What is the difference between the two? And isn't, in fact, the climate action issue of even greater importance? So what this is beginning to do, I think, is to throw exactly that type of question into very stark relief and asking people to think at all levels, environmental, social, and governance, are we actually behaving correctly in the way that people would have expected us, not just now, but in future? Now, I think in that process, the other key factor which I draw attention to is that in delivering the ESG, it's very important to go back to another key instrument of the UN system, the system of environmental economic accounting, which is designed, I think, to deal with this kind of reporting process in an independent, statistically valid way. And the key to that phrase is the hyphen between the environmental and the economic, when it's no longer possible to separate the two issues out. Environmental is economic, economic is environmental. And Professor Dasgupta, for example, in his 2019 study for the British government on the role of nature and biodiversity in promoting the economic prosperity of the planet, was very much based on what he says is a need to reinvent economics around the principles of biodiversity and sustainability. And that process is, of course, a major undertaking. It's revolutionary in its nature, but I don't think it's got very far yet, but it clearly has a long way to go. So I think in terms of where we will want to look next, just to try to summarize those points, it's only the G part in the ESG which really has changed. And it's only changed in the sense of how the economics are reported and what the purpose of those economic studies is all about, the financial piece, not the fact that financial is as critical as anything else. The triple bottom line, therefore, itself has not changed. In the use of the SEEA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, we now have a toolkit which is available statistically as well as an accounting framework, and that doesn't seem to have yet impacted enough, in my view, on the accounting standards boards and all the other people who are reporting on this. It's as if there are 2 or 3 different planets at the moment in terms of the way people look at this, and they're not easily talking to each other. And thirdly, I think we have to go back to this concept of negative externality, and the whole purpose of what we're undertaking here is to make it visible and clearly possible to transition from one to the other, from the linear system to the circular system. And in that process, it's extremely important to see how already, as Slavko has been very nicely pointing out and showing, how bodies like the European Union have now adopted these tools into the heart of the way they work. And that's because they filled a gap which the governments of those countries have frequently said, and they're not the only ones. There are many other countries around the world looking very positively at this or acting positively on it. And these gaps are ones the governments had never really filled to date. And it's a great success, I think, for the UN that they've managed to start plugging that hole. So I will leave it at that point, Bianca. Hope that was of use. And if there are questions later, I'll try to help respond then.
Thanks, Julian, for highlighting the importance of ESG factors in sustainable resource management, but specifically UNFC. Okay, so you concluded the first part where we talked about UNFC in general, but as you heard from the previous speakers, of course, UNFC is applicable to a very wide range of resources. This webinar will not be sufficient to go really in depth onto how it is applied for the specific resources, but we wanted to give you an overview because applying one system to resources that differ as much from each other as minerals and water do can be a big challenge. So we asked the working group chairs of the expert group on resource management to briefly touch upon the resource-specific challenges. And we're going to start with Hendrik, who is the chair of the minerals working group. Hendrik, thanks for joining, and I give you the floor.
All right, let me just working on sharing the slides here.
If you have difficulties, you can also send it to us and then we'll share it, if that helps.
Yeah, I'll do that. That's probably the easiest way to do it right now. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Not the usual computer. Perhaps just move on with the next speaker and I'll come back to me and I'll send you the slides here. Sorry.
Okay, that's no problem. The next speaker is Ulrich, who's going to talk about anthropogenic resources and how UNFC is applicable to them. Ulrich, if that's okay for you, we'll continue with you.
Yeah, hello, Bianca.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, good afternoon. I try to do the same exercise and share the screen. Give me a second. Okay.
Yes, we see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Well, we're now starting with the secondary raw materials. I mean, Having Hendrik at first would be perfect because he would talk about mining and how to extract primary resources. This talk is about the secondary raw materials, also called anthropogenic resources. Let me start an introduction about the circular economy. Well, the principles of circular economy is to keep the value of products and materials in the society, in the economy, as long as possible. Another objective is to reduce the waste and to use the resources as best as possible, let's say, over the whole life cycle. Of course, we introduce the materials due to mining, they enter the production and commercial phase, it enters the use phase, and then it comes to waste management. But keeping the cycle ongoing is substantial for the circular economy. The circular economy is by definition affects the whole value chain, starting from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, starting with the extraction of raw materials to the production of goods and the waste treatment and disposal phase. And just to give you two numbers of these slides, I mean, in the extraction phase, we are talking about 2.6 billion tons that have been extracted in 1970s, so about 50 years ago. And until now, this number has been tripled. So in 2018, humans extracted about 9.4 billions of tons of raw materials. So this is basically only the ore. So this is the material that really enters the economic sphere, but we also have wastes that are generated and that goes along with the extraction of raw materials. And this number is much larger. So it's about 40 billion metric tons of waste rock tailings and processing losses in 2018. So these materials enter the economic sphere. And at the very end, in the waste treatment and disposal phase, we see these numbers are just for the European Union, that the European Union produces about 2.2 billion tons of waste each year. And currently only about 12% are, let's say, are circular. It means that they re-enter the European Union after waste treatment and recovery. This means, in other words, that it's not only, that means that 100% minus 12%, which is needed from mining, let's say, which is the biggest part of the raw material supply. And as you can see, the residues occur at every stage in the life cycle. So we have residues in the extraction phase. We also have residues at the production phase, and also residues, of course, in the waste treatment and disposal phase. And these residues are potential sources of new products. And you see on the left-hand side these potential sources, just to give you some examples. One, of course, are the residues from mining and metallurgical processing, but it's not only residues from the mining sector, it's also post-consumer residues. It's about batteries at the end of life. It's about cars, vehicles, it's about construction demolition waste, and it's also secondary wastes. It means wastes, for instance, as a result of thermal treatment and other processes that are used to treat the waste. So all these are potential sources that can be potentially converted into new products. And the missing link between the potential sources and the products is the raw material project. So the project, let's say, sorting, recycling and recovery, these projects link the sources with the products. And this is where UNFC comes in, because the UNFC communicates the maturity level of these recycling projects. We've done a study in Switzerland and applied the UNFC for the recovery of metals from municipal solid waste incineration. And we have seen it took about 10 years to develop the project. I mean, 10 years from having a person who has the idea, and the intention to start recovering materials, and then it goes through preliminary technical feasibility studies, waste sampling and this stuff, getting approval from the authorities, finding a place to build the recycling facility. So in total, it took about 10 years. And it means the maturity level of at the beginning was very low, and there were quite a lot of barriers to move forward with this project. But as the project moved forward in the resource progression chain, let's say the maturity level of the project went up. Yeah, and this maturity level can be monitored in a standardized way with the UNFC, which means it can also be communicated to parties who are interested in the development of this recycling project. We already heard this from Slavko, that the UNFC provides a package of document in order to apply it consistently to get reliable and reproducible results. It all starts with the UNFC 2019, which is the top level document. And for anthropogenic resources or secondary raw materials, there's a special specifications available on the web. And of course, there's some guidelines about how to define recycling projects and this stuff. I don't go into the details here. This brings me to my final slide, which is about UNFC in practice. If you have a look on the website of the UNECE, you already find a list of case studies for secondary raw materials. Currently, there are 10 case studies listed on the website. The scope is very broad. Yeah, it's about remining. It means extracting materials from mining residues, and it also includes, let's say, traditional recycling projects. It's about mineral extraction, it's about metal extraction. It's about plastics. It's about mobile phones and wind turbines and all this stuff. So please have a look on the website. The next one here is an announcement. There is a European project called Futuram. It runs over 4 years. And this project will deliver new case studies. They deliver site-specific case studies, and you see these red dots on the map, for instance, about phosphor recovery from sewage sludge in Vienna, or you also see the recovery of critical raw materials from waste electronic equipment in France and many others. If you're interested in this case study, please have a look on the website on futuram.eu. And the last item here on this slide, it was also mentioned at the beginning that UNFC is currently part of the Critical Raw Materials Act that was launched by the European Commission in March last year. And this Critical Raw Materials Act covers the whole value chain that we have seen at the beginning. It really starts from the extraction to raw materials to the waste management phase. And therefore, it also includes UNFC for recycling projects. I do hope that this was useful to share this information about recycling and secondary raw materials. If you want to learn more, please reach out to me, drop me an email, or having a look on the website of the UNECE expert group of resource management. There's a working group on anthropogenic resources with further information about secondary raw materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ulrich. And I think anthropogenic resources was a great topic to start with because they are going to play a key role for circularity. However, we can go back to Hendrik now, to the primary materials. Yes, exactly. We see the presentation. Okay, Hendrik,
Perfect.
Again, I give you the floor. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and my apologies for having an early morning issue here, but we'll move on anyway. And I just wanted to introduce you to the topic of minerals. If we're looking at critical raw materials, minerals continually come up because in many ways they are the building blocks of all of the technology and all of the advances that we want to make going forward. We can go to the next slide, please. We've seen the structure of the UNFC, all of the documents that are available, but I want to talk specifically how these are actually used in examining minerals and evaluating mineral projects. So go to the next slide. The basic cornerstone of the UNFC is the codification of projects and quantities and how one classifies them using the 3 axes, the E and the F and the G axes, allowing us to sort of very simply take a complex project and simplify it and synthesize it down to a simple code that allows us to compare resources very readily. Next slide, please. Once that classification is done, we can then examine different projects at different levels, from viable to potentially viable to non-viable, quickly seeing where projects are stalled, what is holding them up, or where they're advancing and changing, and we're increasing our commodities that are available to us as a society. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to understand that a lot of industry works on the basis of the financial system. They use the international template for reporting to explain what their products look like for the stock exchanges. And the UNFC uses a different system, and the two systems are actually very synergistic. They work well together, but often they're portrayed as being competitive, and that's just not correct. It's basically they're very synergistic systems for reporting how mineral deposits can be evaluated. Next slide, please. So, for instance, in the CRISCO template, which is shown as that graph in the middle, if you have an exploration result from an early level examination of a mineral showing, it basically classifies in the 334 stage in the UNFC. Our next slide. As we get more information and our confidence in the resource estimate increases, the classification in the CRISCO template moves from inferred to indicated to measured resources, and those map into the orange boxes within the UNFC classification as the 221, 222, and 223 levels of classification. And finally, the next slide, please. As we move into the highest level of confidence, where we're actually certain that we have ore and that it's economically feasible and has met all of our criteria, we move from the mineral reserve state in the CRISCO template as a probable or proved reserve into the green boxes in the UNFC system as the 112 for the probable and 1111 for the proved ore, basically. So the two systems actually work hand in hand and actually are very synergistic. Next slide, please. Now, the details for how the reporting under the UNFC system is done are provided in the sort of supplementary specifications, and they go through a lot more of the breakdown of the elements on how to classify a particular mineral deposit. Next slide, please. But the case studies, as have been described by Ulrich and others, are really excellent places to go to see how moving from this abstract concept of classification to pragmatic, okay, here is a resource, how do we classify it? The case studies really do work through individual mineral deposits and allow us to see where that classification works. So they're an excellent resource. Next slide. But it's also important to note that there are a number of different academic papers as well as guidance documents that we've already discussed here that have a lot of information on how that classification can be used, not only to do it, but then how to take it and actually apply it to, say, a national level, as was done by Tom Bide here. Next slide, please. Now, moving forward, one of the new documents that's just coming out at this year's EGRM is we've advanced with the bridging documents. We've made that connection between the CRISCO template and UNFC. We've modernized it and tightened it. If we go to the next slide, please. And just to compare the older system in 2015 with our current system, where we've expanded the levels of classification and how those connections are made. This is a new bridging document that will be revealed at the EGRM coming in this April. And next slide. But it's also accompanied by a new guidance document that works through how these connections are made, decisions that need to be made, and how to do it in a more consistent fashion. So new information and new tools are being developed all the time, and I look forward to your questions. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hendrik, for breaking down this very complex topic into understandable terms, at least as much as one can. I give the floor now to Victor, who is the chair of the Petroleum Working Group and will explain how UNFC is applicable to petroleum projects.
Well, good morning, good day, good evening to everyone. So I need to share my screen, right?
Yes.
So I need to go to that procedure again. I would have that Karen said that the Zoom is better in these operations rather than Teams. So let me see. I think this one. Yes, do you see it? This slide
yes,
one?
we can see it.
Okay, let's start then. Dear colleagues, welcome to this webinar. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Victor Babashev. I am the Petroleum Working Group Chair. And today we embark on a crucial dialogue at the heart of the energy resource management system, aligning our strategies with the Sustainable Development Goals and addressing, of course, climate change. So our guide through this journey is a United Nations Framework Classification. So before going forward, I want to put one important remark, that any other systems, I mean reserve management system, are perfect in the task they created to fulfill. And these tasks are slightly different from the task of the UNFC. So as an example, as of 2024, the new member of the PVG is the OGLC representative. And that was actually my idea to include the PRMS representative to the Petroleum Working Group. So the point is that we need to talk to other systems, since today's world is a world of integration and our planet is one. And we are not in a position to split it in chasing personal agenda. So coming back to my presentation. So as I said, the world is one, and today's world in a crossroads where any decision taken will have huge impact in the future. And a world where the way we manage our resources not only determines our economic prosperity, but also the sustainability of our planet. So the UNFC system itself provides a structured approach to any known type of resources classification that actually differ from other reserve management system that integrates environmental and social consideration, making it an unavailable tool in our quest for sustainable development. So firstly, let's delve into the reserve management system goals. With all current trends to green energy, fossil fuels still the main engine of the world economy. And our aim here is to optimize fiscal benefits while ensuring the population's well-being without compromising the environmental integrity upon which our future depends. So a critical aspect of our discussion revolves around financial indicators and the concept of the social discount rate. It's very interesting term which will come up in 2023. So traditional metrics like net present value or internal rate of return rely on discounted cash flows, which may not fully capture the long-term impact of our decisions on sustainability and societal well-being. So that comes us to the main question, and I think essential one: can we and should we discount the future? So climate change, a defining challenge of our times, demands a re-evaluation of how we value future impacts. A lower or undiscounted social discount rate reflects a commitment to the future generation, urging us to invest more today in mitigation and adaptation effort in future. The only way To do it is to evaluate not economical aspects of any project, but also take into account social and the environmental impact of any investment decision taken. So in conclusion, in general, so again, I will not go to the to these schemas and to this classification, because there's a lot of mathematics behind that. But in general, the UNFC, for me, because I came from the oil and gas, and actually I know something in the reserve management system, is a holistic approach to resource management, aligns perfectly with our need to respond efficiently to the climate change and advance toward the SDGs. As we navigate these challenges, the principles outlined today guide us toward a future where economic, environmental, and social sustainability are in the harmony. I mean, the harmony is actually the word I like best. So let's carry forward this conversation, ensuring our actions today leave a legacy of the prosperity and the resilience for the generation to come. So finishing my presentation, I would like to thank you all for your attention. Thank the organizers of this webinar, and I shall look forward to our continued commitment in ensuring sustainability in resource management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor, for also highlighting the key role that responsible management of petroleum has for climate action. Now we're going to make a thematic jump by inviting Goia to speak. She is going to speak about UNFC for renewable energy sources, which of course is a very broad term already. But before saying too much, Goia, I'll hand over to you. I cannot see you, unfortunately. I only see a black screen. Now we see you, but we don't hear you. Now we hear you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Bianca, I seem to be unable to share the screen. I don't know why. It doesn't give me the option to view.
Okay, that's no problem.
PowerPoint.
We can share the presentation for you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to apologize first and foremost for my voice. Unfortunately, I've come down with a terrible cold with a dry cough and high temperature. But I wanted to make it today because obviously UNFC is worth it. And a big thank you, Bianca, to you and to the Resource Management Youth member group.
Thank you for making it.
Thank you. I would like to try and introduce this topic of the renewable energy resources. You've heard already about the conventional energy resources, you've heard about minerals, you've heard about circularity in the mining world, and you've also heard about the petroleum sector. How come that UNFC is applicable also to UNFC, to renewables? Next slide, please. Well, let's talk about the finite energy resources first. In this very simple diagram here, you see how we go from the original source of these conventional energy resources to having a very final product available for the market, available for the end users. And so if you're talking oil and gas, you would go from a conventional petroleum accumulation underground to an extraction process that allows you to get those fluids to the surface, to processing of those fluids in order to make them marketable, to finally that final end use. And if we're talking about minerals, it's exactly the same. You will be going from a natural deposit available to you, and then through extraction processes, engineered processes, you would be able to come up with sales products, for example, uranium, coal, and minerals. So this is the workflow that allows us in UNFC to define the fundamental concept of a project. And the project is something on which finally a decision will be made on whether or not to proceed. On this slide, what is very important is that that petroleum accumulation, that deposit, they are finite in quantities. Once you have finished exploiting those resources at that site, you would have to pack and go and move to another site. And in the process, you will always leave something behind, maybe a concentration, a low concentration of mineral in a certain rock volume, or perhaps a certain percentage of fluids. Next slide, please. What about renewables? Well, renewables are not infinite, and this is something very, very important for all of us to understand. Although we wish we had a fuller utopia available to us, sadly for us, nothing is really infinite, because ultimately, also with renewable energy, we need an engineered system in order to be able to capture those natural resources and convert them into electricity, into heating, into cooling, or into something like also biofuels. So in this picture, what you see from the left-hand side, moving to the right-hand side, is once again the same project concept. So you see that we're going from a renewable energy source, which could be the natural radiation of the sun. It could be the wind blowing at a certain location on Earth. Then you need the engineered infrastructure that allows you to capture and convert those raw sources into something which is finally marketable. So the project here too is the link between the source, the natural renewable source, and the marketable quantities of energy products. Many of my colleagues have already touched upon the issues of sustainability. Again, the world is not perfect, and even in renewable energy projects, we have to watch out for unintended consequences. Emissions do not tell the full story. So we have to also consider aspects of land use or water use or air impacts. We have to also consider how sustainable the materials used in the renewable energy infrastructure are. If I mention wind, which is what we're looking at here, I actually need to remind myself that the original generation of wind turbine blades has had and continues to have recycling and disposal issues. So the wind farms from the 90s that we are starting to decommission now are posing significant challenges because those materials cannot easily be cut, cannot easily be reconverted. You need a lot of energy in to reconvert those materials, or otherwise they end up in landfill, which by all means is not a sustainable practice. Next, please. In the renewables, as well as in the finite energy resource world, what we ultimately care for is the integral of the product over time. So if I look at the output from a wind turbine over time, for example, over the 20 years of the project lifetime, if I look at the output from solar PV, from an installation on the roof of my house, and if I look at that over, again, the 10 or 20 years lifetime of that installation, that integral is what we call in UNFC jargon the resources. So here too, there's nothing different between application to conventional energy resources and renewable energy resources. Ultimately, the financial decision is still made around a project definition. And no project is infinite because the infrastructure is not infinite. The infrastructure will need some replacements. The infrastructure is subject to ruptures, to decay. So no project is ever going to be infinite. We can change out infrastructure, but that corresponds to an additional investment in that project. So on this slide, I've just recapped very simply how you would apply UNFC to geothermal energy resources. They're probably the closest to the petroleum and the minerals world in that we are still dealing with the subsurface. So if you extract heat from the subsurface and you produce it to the surface, the amount of heat or electricity you can produce over time, that's our renewable resource. Next, please. Last slide for me, just to tell you how we have gone over time from the applicability of UNFC to solid fuels and minerals and petroleum resources to renewable energy resources. It all started with the publication of the Renewable Energy Specifications back in 2016, which was a major endeavor because we realized that the key role of renewable energy towards a sustainable future highlighted the need to harmonize the way in which its potential is transparently reported. Again, just because it's renewable, it doesn't mean that it's always feasible from a technical, social, and environmental point of view. And also we realized that investors, regulators, governments, and consumers, they all needed to have a common comparison framework in order to make decisions between renewable projects and non-renewable projects. And then with a common language, you can compare not only revenues, but most importantly today, the sustainability of those energy provision options. And so then following 2016, we went on with the publication of the bioenergy specifications, then the anthropogenic resources, which have already been mentioned to you. And also we developed the geothermal, solar, wind, and other specifications are in progress. Because things keep on changing, the UNFC keeps on being updated. This is the natural way in which applications evolve over time. Then these products, these documents need to be updated regularly. So we recently updated, for example, in 2022, at the end of 2022, we updated geothermal specifications. Next slide, please. And with this, with what remains of my voice, I just wanted to thank you for your attention. Thank you, and thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Gioia, for making the time to speak here on this very important topic, even though you're sick. Because especially considering the decisions at COP28 in Dubai, meaning the aim to triple renewable energy production globally, I think it's really important to really look at all the implications of renewable energy, because it's going to be crucial to use its full potential for responsible energy and potentially sustainable energy production. So thank you for being here and presenting. Now let's go to our next resource, which is nuclear. Also a low emission source of energy, not very uncontroversial. So Mike, I ask you to come to the floor and give a brief introduction to nuclear.
Yes, thank you very much for the invite and the opportunity to speak today. Full disclosure, I normally participate in the Renewable Energy Working Group, so nuclear is not my area of expertise, but we do work with nuclear resources very frequently. Really, when we start analyzing grids, we can do about 80% greenhouse gas reductions using renewable energy and battery storage systems, other energy storage systems. And then for that last 20% to get to net zero, we really look at three principal technologies, either nuclear, actually in small modular nuclear reactors in particular. We look at hydrogen in its various forms, either combusted or used as an energy carrier in a fuel cell, and or carbon capture sequestration, usually paired with bioenergy. So you have bioenergy CCS. So nuclear in particular is it's a very expensive technology. It typically runs about 10 times the cost of a fossil gas-fired power plant. And it takes a long time to develop these projects. Many projects take 20, 30 years from conception to actually put in the ground. And nuclear, you've got that cost element, but also there's a lot of social and environmental concerns around development of nuclear uranium mining, as well as the nuclear facilities themselves. So the UNFC is particularly valuable in this instance because it provides information to the energy regulators in any specific location who are trying to integrate this nuclear facility within their plan, but also it provides information to the investors. They're looking at a 20, 30-year investment profile, so they need to make sure that the fuel will be there when the reactor is constructed, and so they need that to base their investment decisions on and really deliver the reactors. So so the UNFC provides one of very few mechanisms to actually do this reporting. The Red Book is another one, but we've got the bridging documents between all these other national level standards in the UN standards. And that's also important because much of the nuclear fuel is delivered across international borders. So, planners and investors across the world need access to figure out how, the quantities available, when they'll be available, do they have that social, environmental, and technical feasibility to develop the project. So I'll probably wrap it up there because I'm kind of reaching the extent of my nuclear experience, but return it back to you, Bianca.
Thank you. It was perfect to give an introduction to the topic. Thanks, Mike, for making it. Now we are going to continue with the youngest resource that's that UNFC is being applied to, which is groundwater. I hand it over to Peter, the chair of the Groundwater Working Group, to give some brief remarks on this topic. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Bianca. Is this slide? I need to share my screen, I suppose. Yeah. Second.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yeah, okay. I'll make it full screen. Second. Yeah. So yes, thanks Bianca for giving me the opportunity to present the UNECE for groundwater resources. The title, the vital resource taken for granted. So I'm the chair of the Groundwater Resources Working Group, and I will tell you a little bit background on how UNFC for groundwater works. So as you may know, groundwater has become great focus in 2022. It was the UNESCO groundwater year, and many good reports appeared on the role of groundwater, making the invisible visible. So Goia already showed this figure where her specifications document first came into play, and for the groundwater resources, all of this started in 2019, where the supplemental specifications document started to be developed within a working group. And this has now been into public consultation and will be continued to be further developed also with the accompanying documents like the bridging documents, the guidelines documents, and which you have seen here. So groundwater resources and the Sustainable Development Goal linkages is important to mention. I think important for the UNFC E-axis. As you can see, maybe you think that UNFC for groundwater is only relevant for the SDG 6 on water and sanitation, but it actually has a lot of linkages also with other SDGs. Some of them reinforcing, some of them mixed, and some of them conflicting with other SDGs. So this is important. For the classification system, especially as I said for the E-axis on the environmental issues. This you can also see here on how groundwater systems relate to specific SDGs. And also here you can see that groundwater accounts for almost 100% of all the liquid fresh water on Earth. But groundwater is different from the other resources which you heard about because you know that groundwater is a common pool resource. So it is not a commodity as such which you can develop and in the same way as you do for minerals, as you do for oil and gas and so on. But nevertheless, it is important to include groundwater in the UNFC system in the same way as you do for other resources, but it requires some special things for doing so, and so also it requires some specific text for including it in the supplemental specifications. Because of this common pool resource, which also is renewable, and also when you develop groundwater projects at the project level, you need to take account for that this groundwater resource development may affect other resources and may affect groundwater resources at another level, at another aquifer. So this is important, and this is, you can see here in this figure how the environmental socio-economic viability is estimated at the project level, and also of course the technical and the uncertainty in the estimates. But also it is important that in order to include this common pool resource, you need to also include socially necessary projects, as we call them, because some projects may not be viable according to the classification in the cube or in the 2D classification system, but it may be socially necessary because there may be a small-scale agriculture, there may be traditional uses of groundwater at the local level, and so you need to account for this in some way. And this is being developed, and we hope to demonstrate in the very near future how all of this works in practice. And for this, we also try to develop case studies. I will show you one example. We also have another example on a transboundary groundwater resource project. So where groundwater as an aquifer crosses different borders. And this is also very important, of course. In this case, this is part of an integrated strategy case in Mexico. It's part of a mining project, mining case, where we demonstrate the use for groundwater next to the mining projects going on in the same area. So this is a case of competing uses for groundwater for mining projects, but also for agriculture, for domestic use, drinking water projects, and so on. And so this is where we try to demonstrate how all of this works for groundwater. So in summary, the groundwater resources are a common pool reserve, as I said, and so this makes some requires some additional requirements for the supplemental specifications. I think I will keep it here. I'm open for any questions during the Q&A. Back to you, Bianca.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very much looking forward to see how the working group will develop and how UNFC can be applied to water, groundwater as a resource, since that's not being done in many areas of the resource management sphere, I'd say. Thank you. We have one more speaker. So I'm going to flag that here. We are going to go over time. We have one more speaker, Serge van Gessel. He unfortunately couldn't make it live today. However, he was kind enough to pre-record a video on UNFC for injection projects. We're going to play the video. Also, we are going to keep the Q&A very, very short, only going to take 1 or 2. Feel free to also use the chat for questions, but we're also going to circulate a form where you can ask other questions. That being said, we're going to play Serge's video. We don't hear or see it. We see it, but we don't hear it. Still no sound, unfortunately.
While sharing the sound, you have to check that share sound option.
UNFC for injection projects. My name is Serge van Gessel, and I'm the chair of the injection projects working group. Storage covers a broad range of technologies which can be deployed. Storage of fluids such as oil, hydrogen, and other feedstock products typically takes place in big tanks. Furthermore, we can also store electrical energy in batteries, pumped hydro lakes, and other electrical energy storage technologies. In the underground, we can also store substances in geological formations, with the major benefit being that these formations offer storage capacities that are typically several orders of magnitude larger than the capacity of typical surface storage technologies. Examples of geological formations that are suitable for injection and storage of fluids are depleted gas fields, saline aquifers, salt caverns, and hard rock tunnels. Depending on the design specifications and geological characteristics, these formations may hold various types of fluids, such as CO2 captured from fossil energy production plants and industrial processes, or natural gas and hydrogen for securing supply and balancing daily or to seasonal fluctuations in production and consumption of energy. The specifications for injection projects are targeting storage technologies in geological formations. In this case, the storage space within the geological formation defines the resource. Injected and stored fluids define the product. Geological storage spaces exist or can be engineered at different depth intervals, ranging from several tens of meters up to several kilometers. The space either consists of interconnected pores in the rock itself, such as, for example, in the case of a gas field or an aquifer, or it consists of a cavern space that may be created by excavating rock or through the solution of salt in rock salt formations. Besides offering the possibility to inject fluids, it is important that the geological formation is also capable of containing the fluids for a long time in the permitted underground space. Typically, this is achieved by the existence of a sealing formation that occurs on top and on the flanks of the storage space. The existence of the storage space and the trapping mechanism must be proven by drilling wells. These wells are also needed to access the storage space for the injection of fluids. In the context of UNFC, the quantity represents the amount of fluid that can be injected and stored. The quantity will be different for different kinds of fluids and also varies with the amount of compression and other operational parameters defined by the storage project. It is therefore that the quantity does not represent the volume of the storage space itself. The storage project is defined by the underground space, the facilities at the surface which are needed to compress or for the treatment of gas, and the wells connecting the surface facilities to the underground space. The boundaries of the project are typically defined by the points where the facility is connected to the pipelines or other means of fluid transport, such as ships, trailers, and other types of transport. Storage projects come in many forms. In UNFC, 3 main types of storage are identified. The first type concerns the injection of CO2 with the objective to prevent emissions to the atmosphere by capturing and permanently containing the CO2 in the underground. In this case, the injection will be continuous and gradually fill the underground space until the permitted quantity or maximum pressure has been reached. The second type involves temporary storage, for example, natural gas, hydrogen, oil, or other feedstock fluids. In this case, the fluids are repeatedly injected and withdrawn again for further use. The third and last type concerns the injection of fluids, typically CO2, to help increasing the extraction of hydrocarbons from an oil or gas field. In this case, the CO2 also remains in the reservoir, but parts of it may come to the surface again with the extraction of the hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons, by the way, are classified under the specifications for petroleum projects. The total quantity represents the maximum allowed or permitted amount of fluid that can be injected and stored by the storage project. In the case of temporary storage projects, the total quantity may be split into the cushion gas quantity for maintaining sufficient pressure in the reservoir and the working gas quantity, which is representing the gas that goes in and out of the storage during operation. Injection projects for the purpose of geological storage can be classified by the E, F, and G axis in the UNFC framework, just like extraction projects. The supplementary specifications provide further guidance on how to implement UNFC in this case. With viable projects, the storage space has been discovered and developed for storage. Injection may already take place or is expected to start in the foreseeable future. With potentially viable projects, the storage space has also been discovered, yet further studies and appraisal are needed to justify development. With prospective projects, the storage space is not yet discovered by wells, and additional exploration activities are needed to prove the existence and suitability. Finally, there may be conceptual projects based on storage methods that are still technically immature. The UNFC Injection Project Initiative started in 2010 with the focus on injection and long-term geological storage of CO2. The project maturity principles of UNFC are generally applicable and can be bridged to the SPE SRMS classification system. The technical, social, economic, and environmental challenges may differ, however, from extractive activities. The UNFC 2009-based specifications were published in 2016, and currently the updated UNFC 2019-based specifications are under review for EGRM 15. These updated specifications also put further emphasis on the storage and buffering of renewable gases in support of the green energy and industry transition. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and wish you a pleasant day.
Although he is not here, thank you, Serge, of course. And let me take this time also to thank every expert and every speaker for taking the time to speak at this webinar here. I think you all gave fantastic overviews, really showcasing how diverse the application of UNFC is and how it can and will play a role in achieving a more sustainable future for the youth and the upcoming generations by implementing it today. We only have time for one more question. However, I also want to highlight that we will circulate a feedback form that you can use to ask questions and then that then will be answered by the respective experts. We will also make the recording and slides available. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or feel free to also write it into the chat. And I see Diego. Yes, please go ahead. Oh, can we unmute you? Let me see if I can unmute you. Yes. Now
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for this really good webinar, and it's really good for us to get an understanding of the UNFC itself, because at first it might seem very complicated, but as all the experts have explained, it is much more accessible now. But one question I had, particularly to the extractives, I saw that one of the speakers, I forgot the expert's name, I'm sorry, but one of the
Hendrik.
results, yeah, one of the results from the case studies that have been already done, I think in 2022, in Sweden, particularly this one was in Norra Kärr in southern Sweden, on the rare earth classification. The environmental section, or environmental and social section for that, is E2. And one of the things that I was very interested in is how in these projects, I still didn't understand the methodology very well. And aside from that, is how relevant would civil society reports be impactful for having a better understanding of the environmental and social concerns? Because one of the sections that mentioned, and I briefly skimmed through the case study itself, and one of the things that it mentioned for the E2 to move into E1, of course, the environmental impact assessment would have to be fulfilled and all of that. But aside from that, is that there should be social support for this mine. And having done some research in the area and having close connections with a lot of the grassroots movements there that have mobilized against the mine, this is a really difficult aspect. At least as far as just really quickly, at least as far as the mine is concerned. I know I'm speaking about a specific case study, but this is broad because it's global. So I just want to know. What does that mean in terms of gaining that social acceptance? Yeah, and how much will civil society reports, not particularly to this case study, but I'm thinking many case studies civil society organizations have done all over the world, how they can be useful for you in this assessment?
Well, if I may jump in, Diego, thank you for the question. I think you raise another question which is quite important, and this is the role of UNFC in the time series. So the UNFC you can follow the development of the project. Mentioning Norra Kärr and the issues with the environmental permitting is quite well known, and there were several classifications through the time done in the Norra Kärr, and exactly on the issue of environmental permit, the court case and the stop and move on and the stop, and all the things were described also through the UNFC classification. With regard to the social society or social environmental groups, whomever, you are aware that they are a part of the environmental impact assessment stakeholder process, and this process needs to be carried out in the way that their voice is heard and would have a direct impact on the outcome of the environmental impact assessment as such, or the permit regarding related to that. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for the great question and insightful answer. We would love to take more questions. However, as I said, please feel free to put them into the feedback form that we will circulate. Other than that, I don't have much more left to say, except also big thanks to UNECE for supporting the Resource Management Young Member Group and putting this webinar together. If this sparked your interest, I recommend you to participate at and register for the UNECE Resource Management Week in 2024, in April, sorry, where the minds behind UNFC and UNRMS, which is the United Nations Resource Management System, meet and further discuss on how sustainability in resource management can be assured. You would meet most of the experts who spoke today and many more, so it's a great opportunity to not only learn about it, but also network. Other than that, I have nothing else to say. Thank you for attending the webinar, and we hope to see more of you in maybe some of the resource management young member group sessions. If you're interested, if you're under 35 and interested in resource management, feel free to contact us. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thanks for now.
Thank you, Bianca and all. Bye.